It is Sunday School, June 23rd, 2024. What we've got here in every, I guess you'd say, properly appointed Masonic Lodge room, usually in an inconspicuous place in the east, maybe to the on the southeast section of the lodge, is a variation of this symbol right here. Now, the very simplest image that's placed there is simply that circle with a dot in it, and those with the two parallel vertical lines on either side of it. And sometimes, and often, it's surmounted by a book that is designated the VSL, or the volume of the sacred law. And in many cases, especially in the United States, the normal VSL, or the image of the VSL, is a Bible. Okay. And if it really gets fancy, there are two images of biblical characters. One's sort of a wild and crazy guy with his arm up there, and he's wearing I don't know, goat skin or something like that, and he's half naked and barefoot, and I don't know where he gets his haircut, but obviously he's a wild guy. And the other guy is sort of cool and demure and looks at least upper middle class. Those are the Saints John. Okay, John the Baptist. There, he's got locusts on his breath, and there is John the Evangelist, to whom the Gospel of John is referred to. Okay, supposedly John the Evangelist wrote the Gospel of John. Now we know that the Gospel of John was written many years after both of these guys were long dead. But nevertheless, the Gospel of John is the one most, is the gospel that is most quoted by mystics and sort of non-sectarian universal, okay, most any religion, okay, is comfortable with the profound mysticism that is described in the book of John. So it's not full of narratives and things. It's the one that says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was," okay, and the modern or more modern commentators really have to do some gymnastics to fit the wisdom of John into the sort of simple narrative and later doctrines of the Christian religion. So John's a pretty cool guy. Most yogis quote John a lot. Okay, he's not an asshole like Paul. Okay. Oh, what did I say? Anyway, hope I didn't step on any Paul's toes. If I did, I apologize that Paul was an asshole. Okay, hang on just a second. I'm going to decline that call. I don't think anybody is meant to be calling me. Anyway, Why am I telling you this? Because those two guys rep represented in this simple diagram are representative of two opposite times of the year. John the Baptist is like right now. June, probably officially June 24th, but June 23rd, or just right around the summer solstice. And then John the Evangelist is December, the winter solstice. Okay. So it's got that going for it. And like all Masonic symbols, when you join a Masonic lodge, you ask your fellow lodge members, tell me about that symbol up there. What exactly does that designate? And some of them will say, well, it's the Saints John. And every Masonic lodge, at least in the United States, says that the lodge room is dedicated to the Saints John. Okay. Now, just the general history of Freemasonry. Just going back to the 18th century, 17th century, that developed like in Scotland, and everything was dedicated to a saint of some kind. Okay, all important things were dedicated to a saint. I mean, weavers had saints and hangmen had saints, and everything was. So it is very logical, just given the objective history of Masonry, that the something as important as a miniature working model of the cosmos, which is what a lodge room is, should be dedicated to something. And why the decision was made that it was the Saints John, I don't know. Okay, I don't know. But that is a pretty universal Kabbalistic concept that is okay. We got the Nuit in the circle and Hadit in the point in the center, and we've got the two pillars of the tree of life, and right in the center is the sun, which is that's also this. Oh, it's got all sorts of stuff going for it. But because today is St. John the Baptist Day, I'm going to share with you a few things I wrote in a fiction concerning John the Baptist and his relationship in a historical way, and not so much in a supernatural way, but in a historic way. John, if we want to look at the gospel narrative as at least having the pretense of being his history, John and Jesus were cousins. Okay, and John's father was Zechariah, who was the high priest of Israel. I mean, he was like the Pope almost. Okay. And for a long time, especially with the frustration of Roman occupation, for years, in that frustration, everyone was in the Jewish community were looking for some revolutionary moment to trigger a revolt of some kind to overthrow the Roman occupation. The Romans installed this phony King Herod, who wasn't even well, he was an Arab. Okay, so but anyway, so there was an aristocracy, an existing aristocracy, just like the King and Queen of England and things like that. There was aristocracy, a hereditary bloodline aristocracy, out of which the leader, kind of the mythological leader of this revolt would be. And so it was just like the hereditary thing with the King and Queen of England type thing. You had to be born. You had a bloodline that put you in an order for, okay, who should be the hereditary, the real life political, military, everything, king of the Jews. There is one, okay? There is one, but just by bloodline. And Zechariah and his wife, who was, it's complicated, she was a Benjamite, and he was a Davidian, so he came down from the supposed King David, and she came from the tribe of Benjamin, who were allotted the real estate that Jerusalem was built on. It's a pretty important family. And so when they got married, their son, their firstborn son, probably, was John. And because of the grafting of the bloodlines, John was going to be king of the Jews, okay? He was Prince Charles. God's going to be King Charles, okay? But there was another couple, and that was Joseph, who was the son of Heli, who was just... these weren't poor folks, okay? These were aristocrats. These were wealthy people. If Joseph was a carpenter, he was an industrial carpenter. He was a... he wasn't sawing things himself. He had 1,000 workers doing it. Okay, he was truly an industrial builder. And he was really old, okay, but his bloodline was pure. It was a straighter link to King David than Zechariah was. And the people that were figuring that stuff out said, wow, Zechariah's, we could groom him to be the revolutionary king and install him. And but they said, oh, if only old Joseph over there could marry a Benjamite that was as pure as Zechariah's wife, bloodline, that would even be closer. Nobody could argue with that. And that's Joseph and Mary. So this is what I wrote in chapter 2 of An Accidental Christ. Jesus was afraid of John. They first met as boys shortly after Jesus returned from Egypt. But their lives had been entwined long before they were born. Both were hereditary hybrids, blood stars of Jewish royalty. John's mother, Elizabeth, was also a Benjamite princess and great aunt of Mary, the mother of Jesus. John's father, Zechariah, was a Zadokite high priest of the Temple of Jerusalem, supreme ritualistic officer of all Judaism. The marriage of Zechariah and Elizabeth had been formally arranged in order to breed a David. In the days and weeks after John was born, it was he who was secretly heralded as the King of the Jews, the Messiah. And the elders scrambled to plot how he was to be groomed for coronation after the revolt. That all changed abruptly when it was learned that Joseph ben Heli, a wealthy widower of the house of David, had agreed to espouse a hybrid Benjamite maid, and that she was already with child. Joseph's blood ran closer to the primary Davidian root than did Zechariah's, and Mary's child, and if Mary's child was a boy, his royal star would blaze brighter than John's. Now, I got to stop here and remind you that even though we call Saint John the Baptist as a Christian saint, there was no Christianity, okay? There was no Christianity, okay? This is before Christianity was invented, okay? So he's not in true sense, he's not we could say he's a Jewish saint, but you can't really say he's a Christian saint. At least I can't. Anyway, I digress. Contingency plans were made. If Joseph and Mary brought forth a son, the child would be groomed as a future king, and Zechariah's boy John would then serve as the Messiah's herald and fulfill a key prophecy of Isaiah. They're all sort of basing all of these proofs on also a pre-Christian prophet, Isaiah. Okay. John was too young to remember his brief taste of kingship. But the pain of his father's disappointment, that's Zechariah's disappointment, remained visibly etched on his face until he died. Still, old Zechariah was proud of his contribution and the role his seed would play. "You must be a voice which cries in the wilderness," the old man constantly reminded young John. "You will prepare the way of our Lord and make straight his way." When the word of this plot, if you will, reached the ears of King Herod, the elders, the plotters, quickly decided it'd be best for all concerned if Joseph and Mary secretly took Jesus and sought refuge among the wealthy sympathizers in Egypt. This is the fleeing of Egypt. While Jesus grew refined in the comfort of Egyptian boarding schools, young John remained in Jerusalem and steeped to manhood in a broth of bitter prophecy and Roman brutality. Unlike Jesus, John embraced his hereditary duty with a frightening passion. If he could not be a king, he must be a prophet. And to that end, at the age of 16, he left the boisterous temple school, gave away his possessions, and walked into the Judean wilderness. There, among the blistering stones, serpents, and scorpions, he took the vows of a Nazarite. Now, what's a Nazarite? The Hebrew hero Samson had been a Nazarite, and even though he was his fate, Samson pulled down the temple and crushed himself, committed suicide. Even though just because he had a haircut, and even though his fate was an object lesson in what happens to backsliding Nazarites, he was nonetheless a revered icon of the sect. Each year, spiritually inclined Jewish men seeking religious renewal took the Nazarite vow for short periods of time, 70 or 100 days. Sort of like a religious retreat that people take. During these retreats, they remained celibate and wandered alone in the wilderness, or otherwise kept themselves apart from the community. They fasted and shunned wine and the eating of animal flesh. More often than not, they wallowed in a background meditation of bodily mortifications, during which time they allowed their hair and beards to grow. Occasionally, an aspiring holy man would take the Nazarite vow for life and become a hermit. The Judean wasteland was peppered with these mad and colorful characters. No longer answerable to any community or religious standards, their spiritual quests were entirely their own and inscrutable to the outside world. Most preferred to begin with a year or two of complete silence, wandering the desert, eating only herbs, insects, and manna, M-A-N-N-A, the small hallucinogenic mushrooms that sprouted in the sand in the morning dew. Some dug holes in the sand and sat there for years in continual prayer, much like the sadhus of India that are still wandering around doing inscrutable wild things like that. Others whipped themselves or had others do it. No holy man was truly justified until he had consigned to absolute insignificance all distractions of mind and body. Eventually, even self was absorbed in the crossing of the great mystical abyss, below which division is the result of contradiction, and above which contradiction is unity. Few aspirants ever achieve this transcendent smooth point, this singularity where countenance beholds countenance. Of those who did, most could not survive the influx of light. Their minds shattered like clay vessels struck by lightning. The temple steps were littered with these naked and babbling stillborn prophets. John had gawked at them as a child. At the age of 28, the individual known as John was annihilated in the desert of Judea. Dust, lost in dust. He became this smooth point. What remained behind was a voice crying in the wilderness. What once was the sacred duty of John, son of Zechariah, had now become the unbending will of the Almighty. His personal agonies were now the wrath of God. Well, that's how I sort of pictured the situation of John the Baptist in the book here, Accidental Christ. Okay, I got to check out what time this is. I have to also do this. I hope you don't mind. I'm dressed for the occasion this morning. I want to read something else about June 23rd. Now, June 23rd is, one of those pivotal days. And in my life, it was a date of great significance where one of my lives ended and a new one began. And it all revolved around facing what I assumed to be, what I perceived to be. I had a decision to make, to be on the right side of history or the wrong side of history. And that particular situation has so many parallels to today that I thought I would share this experience, this phase in Constance and I's life that all centers around June 23rd, 1967. Constance left Nebraska. Oh, I'm reading from My Life with the Spirits. Constance left Nebraska and came to live with me on June 15th, 1967. I made a big thing out of it a couple of days ago. The sweet distractions of our honeymoon prevented us from accompanying my brother Mark and a nice young Quaker couple named Carl and Elsa. Actually, I think I can actually say is Ron and Nancy. Wonderful people. Prevented us from accompanying my brother and Ron and Nancy to a peace demonstration on June 23rd in Los Angeles. Now, just to give you a little background, I had been active in the anti-war movement since about 1965. Okay. I got expelled from high school. I got expelled twice, but once because of my anti-Vietnam War. I draft counseled and things like that. I was sort of a very idealistic, wild and crazy guy. Okay. Peace demonstration on June 23rd in Los Angeles. This event would have a profound effect upon Mark, my brother, and change our lives dramatically. President Johnson, okay, who did so many cool other things domestically and socially. I'm digressing here. I mean, the civil rights movement and just wonderful other things. But he had this blind spot, this terrible warlike blind spot where it concerned Vietnam. President Johnson was to appear at the Century Plaza Hotel in Los Angeles. It was a perfect opportunity for the Southern California peace movement to mobilize the most massive demonstration to date against the continuing escalation of the war in Vietnam. This is where my perception of the wrong side of history comes in. The movement on the West Coast at that time was made up primarily of young white adults, students, teachers, and clergy, and kind of liberal professionals of the sort of John F. Kennedy ilk, you know. The day started with a festive, love-in kind of atmosphere that characterized earlier LA demonstrations, which I had attended. The crowd was composed of mostly well-dressed young couples pushing baby carriages and speckled, like as if wearing glasses, spectacled college types in blue work shirts and corduroy jackets. Before sunset, these dilettantes would become violently committed political radicals. Everyone expected the scenario to follow that of previous demonstrations. The demonstrators would position themselves in front of the hotel and chant as long and as loud as possible for the benefit of the television camera and crews. The police would eventually give the order to disperse, and everyone would boo and hiss for a few minutes and then return to their cars, mostly Volkswagen buses, feeling definitely or defiantly self-satisfied. This day would be different. 2 lines of riot-equipped officers. Now, in those days, riot-equipped officers were a rarity. But California had been primed since 19, or Los Angeles anyway, had been primed since 1965 uh, after for the Watts riots, and the police department under the leadership of Tom Redden had become militarized. And this is where you start to see in the cartoons of Arcanum the use of the word pigs. Excuse me. 2 lines of riot-equipped officers sandwiched the entire assembly in front of the hotel. When the order came to disperse, the demonstrators were prevented from moving by the line of the officers behind. Can you see the sandwiching situation going on? The officers in the front of the hotel were ordered to advance on the crowd and use their batons on anyone who would not move. At the same time, the police in back of the demonstrators were ordered to use their batons on anyone attempting to move back. For 25 bloody minutes, the police clubbed away in a shameful attempt to make sure every demonstrator got a taste of the baton. News bureaus around the country called it the worst police riot since the 1930s. Witnesses said it was a miracle nobody died at the scene. Scores were seriously injured and hospitalized. My brother Mark was beaten on the head and face and returned home with his glasses broken and his clothes covered in his blood. Ron and Nancy were also bruised and bloodied, their Quaker commitment to nonviolence severely shaken. The events of June 23rd, 1967, instantly polarized the political consciousness of Southern California. Moderate Democrats became ultra-liberals. Ultra-liberals became radicals. And radicals became downright militant. I'm a communist. I used to be liberal yesterday, but now, no. Yeah, I'm out there now, okay. Shocked by the brutality, but steadfast in their patriotism, moderate Republicans were pushed to become conservative, and conservatives were pushed to become ultra-nationalists, and the ultra-nationalists became downright fascists. No one, it seemed, could remain moderate or neutral. Do you see the parallels I'm talking about? Okay. The horrifying reality of the war in Vietnam and its increasingly brutal and repressive domestic environment had a curious effect on the spiritual life of our little circle of family and friends. As the chaos escalated, so did our efforts toward self-discovery. We engaged in an almost desperate struggle to quickly gain enlightenment. We believed it would be our only avenue of escape from the coming Holocaust. That was June 23rd, 1967. Constance and I we'd been living together since the 15th, and we'd finally legally get ourselves married on November 9th. And then we shortly moved to Oregon, which is where the narrative sort of picks up there. Anyway, I've gone over for Sunday school. I'm sorry I kept you so long with stories of John the Baptist and police riots. But I think we're at a similar pivotal moment. Okay. And I hope with everything that you're reading about in at least an objective source is enabling you to see right now what is and is not on the wrong side of history, and where you will be in 50 some years, if you're lucky enough to be here in 50 some years, if you'll be able to say, I was on the right side of history, no matter what the adventures or the consequences were. I hope you'll be able to say that. So until tomorrow for Monday Morning Magic. Oh, and it's Monday Night Magic class tomorrow too. I better get myself prepared. Anyway, continue to be good to yourself, be good to each other, enjoy the rest of your weekend. Happy June 23rd.